Hi, it's Katrina. History is full of amazing stories, but what about the weird stuff? The things that make you go, wait, that really happened? Buckle up, because today we are diving headfirst into the realm of strange historical mysteries. We'll be investigating a fog so thick and deadly it choked people to death. Was it just bad weather or something more sinister? Then I want to tell you about a legend that says the ancient Olmec may actually be descendants of Atlantis. And we'll be joining a little-known saint on their epic quest for the Holy Grail. So if that sounds good, let's get mysterious.
Were the Olmecs refugees of Atlantis?
When Atlantis was destroyed by the gods, not everybody died. Atlantis sank, but their people survived as seafaring refugees. Where they landed, their ancient Atlantean customs survived. Customs such as building pyramids and worshipping sun gods.
There is a theory gaining traction amongst experts in ancient history that the survivors of Atlantis washed ashore in various parts of the world. Some of them may have landed in the Gulf of Mexico, where they formed the Olmec. As you may already know, the Olmec were later replaced by the Maya. Historians think the Olmec likely morphed into the Maya, a sort of cultural evolution. And since the Maya survive today, in a roundabout way, the indigenous people of the Yucatan Peninsula could have the blood of Atlantis in their veins.
That may sound like a bit of a stretch or like some half-cooked fantasy, but let me tell you more just for fun.
The Olmec civilization is one that's been hard to explain. It was the most influential early civilization in Mesoamerica, yet scientists can't figure out where their people came from, or really what their deal was at all.
The Olmec had amazing skills as stonemasons and architects. They carved gigantic heads that defy logical explanation. They left behind towering monuments and built megaliths that have been lost to history. It's possible that the greatest Maya cities still standing started out as Olmec cities.
The confusing part is that researchers don't know where the Olmecs got their knowledge. There doesn't appear to be any evidence of a prehistoric culture in Mexico slowly evolving to become more and more technologically advanced. The Olmec just they just showed up. From the very beginning, circa 1400 BC, they already knew how to build, farm, and manage a complex civilization. It's not crazy to think the Olmec arrived in Mexico from somewhere else. But was that somewhere else really Atlantis? Most historians don't believe in Atlantis. They say it was made up by Plato as a work of fiction around 400 BC. That was 1,000 years after the Olmec rose to power in Mexico. There is one piece of evidence to support this fringe theory. Archaeologists discovered an artifact in an Olmec ruin that to this day is extremely controversial. They found what appears to be a lodestone compass. It's a unique polished bar with a groove in it and a magnetic mineral composition. The seemingly plain bar works as a compass that can point to magnetic north.
This is a huge deal because it shows that the Olmec could have navigated the open seas using a compass more than 2,000 years before the Vikings set up with their sun crystal. The Olmec already had working compasses 1,000 years before the Chinese invented their first lodestone compass. Could this have been technology from their days living in Atlantis? Could the Olmec have come from a distant island destroyed by the gods? Let me know your thoughts.
How did this ancient warrior survive?
Around the 8th century BC, a warrior suffered a brutal injury. How this guy survived is a mystery to scientists. He got shot in the spine with a bronze arrowhead and walked it off like nothing happened. In fact, he survived long enough that his bone healed around the metal point, fusing the arrowhead to his spine.
This man was extremely lucky to be alive. You might call it a 1,000,000-to-1 shot. But who was he, this mystery warrior who defied death? He was discovered by researchers at Queen's University Belfast in Northern Ireland. They've been studying an area of central Kazakhstan for the last 20 years. Why focus on such a seemingly random area? Because Kazakhstan was home to the mighty Scythians. Svetlana Vayatko and her fellow researchers wanted to learn more about the Scythians' ancient culture. Here's the brief rundown. The Scythians were a group of ferocious nomads who lived across the steppes in Central Asia starting around the 8th century BC. Their dominance lasted for 1,000 years, and although they didn't leave behind any megalithic cities like other cultures, they did leave behind cemeteries. The team from Northern Ireland has been excavating and documenting those very cemeteries, which are spread across Kazakhstan. One of the graves they found had been neglected by the ages and was in rough shape. It had once stood as a large earthen mound but was in ruins, plundered by robbers centuries ago. Locals used the burial mound's soil and stones to build their houses in the 1960s. This left little for the researchers to find. There were a couple of scattered bones lying in the pit where there had once been treasure and the skeletons of Scythian nobility. It was in that pile of scattered bones that researchers found a very curious vertebra. When they looked closely at the vertebra, they found the arrowhead lodged inside it. They also found a piece of a rib that had been fractured, showing that this guy got seriously beaten up. Despite his grueling injuries, he survived. Experts are most likely never going to learn this ancient warrior's name. They'll likely never know who broke his ribs or shot an arrow into his back. If they've learned anything from studying the man's pillaged grave, it's that the Scythians were hard to kill.
They truly did earn their place in history as some of the fiercest fighters who ever lived. And now for a quick break because it's shout-out time! I want to give a huge thank you to EPLVN for the generous super thanks. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family, because why not?
More shrunken heads.
In the 1940s, somebody gave a shrunken head to a museum in Canada. It was about the weirdest gift you could give. Even if it was to a museum, it's been haunting them ever since.
The shrunken head was believed to have belonged to an indigenous Peruvian woman. However, there were worries that it was a fake. For the last 80 years, the museum has been under the impression they were dealing with a shrunken head made from pig or sloth skin. To solve the mystery, scientists finally took the shrunken head in for some CT scans. The scans show that the disturbing artifact is indeed human. The hair shafts pierce the upper layer of skin in the exact same way as human hair follicles stick into the dermis. Everything matches with human anatomy, not pig or sloth anatomy.
Alright, so now Ontario's Chatham-Kent Museum knows for sure they've been holding on to an actual shrunken head. But whose head is it? And why do they have it in the first place?
For the ancient indigenous communities of the Amazon, especially Ecuador and Peru, shrunken heads were objects of great power. They called them sansas, and believed each one contained the spirit and wisdom of its original owner. Original owner as in the person whose body the head was removed from. It was also believed that sansas had supernatural abilities. Have you ever noticed how shrunken heads always have their mouths and eyes sewn shut? This was to trap the soul inside of the head. The practice began in the 1500s, maybe a little earlier. It was a way for warriors to entrap the spirit of their fallen enemies, enslaving their soul. When Europeans started wandering deeper into the jungles of South America, they learned of shrunken heads and became obsessed. Like really obsessed. People at the start of the 20th century kind of loved gruesome artifacts. They would buy actual shrunken human heads from jungle tribes like they were buying magnets at a stall on the beach in Mexico. The high demand for human heads led to an upsurge of violence, with people murdering each other to steal and shrink their noggins. Imagine the border agents checking your bags at the airport and finding a human head shrunken down to only 3 inches. When they ran out of people to kill, the tribe started making fake human heads with animal skins. Sometimes they used monkey heads. Amazonian cultures who practiced head shrinking included the Shuar, Achuar, Wampis, Kandoshi Shambra, and Aguaruna.
Unfortunately, the origin of the head in the Canadian Museum remains a mystery. Nobody knows if it was used as a ceremonial head or if it was created for commercial sale. The person's soul could still be trapped inside of it. Someone needs to release them.
The other Dyatlov Pass incident.
The Dyatlov Pass incident of 1959 has gone down in history as one of the weirdest things that ever happened. Period. Final. It was crazy.
9 Soviet hikers ventured into the wilderness and died under very mysterious circumstances. Their bodies were found scattered around their tents. They had fled naked into the night and been torn apart by an unidentified beast.
But I'm not here to talk about the Dyatlov Pass incident. I'm here to tell you about another incident you hardly ever hear about. But it is just as shocking, if not more.
It was the summer of 1993. 7 hikers left on an expedition to explore the Kamar Daban mountain range in eastern Siberia, close to Lake Baikal. They were in high spirits, excited to venture out into a place that was already well known. They weren't going into an unexplored zone, but to a place popular with summer tourists. The leader of the expedition was 41-year-old survivalist and experienced mountaineer Lyudmila Korovina. She had 6 students along with her, ranging from between 15 and 24 years old. Like I said, this wasn't an expedition into the unknown. Everything should have been totally fine. The hike wasn't even that difficult. They set out on August 2nd. The 7 hikers were expected to make contact with another hiking party 3 days later on the 5th. When the 5th rolled around, Lyudmila's group was nowhere to be found. Something bad had happened. Very, very bad. On August 10th, 5 days after the missed rendezvous, a group of kayakers saw something strange moving in the trees along the riverbank. It was a girl all by herself, staring at them from the trees. She didn't make any move to signal them. She just stared at them like a phantom. The kayakers pulled their vessels onto the shore and approached the girl. They were shocked to find her covered in blood. She looked like Carrie at the end of that movie Carrie, all drenched in pig's blood. She also appeared to be in shock. The only thing the kayakers could get out of her was her name, Valentina Utochenko. She was one of Lyudmila's missing students. She was also the only survivor from her group. Once the kayakers got Valentina to the police, she revealed a story that to this day barely anybody believes. You'll see exactly why soon enough. According to Valentina, the group reached their intended summit ahead of schedule after 2 days of climbing. As they began their descent, it started to rain heavily, and that was when the trouble started. Rain itself wasn't a big deal. The girls had wet gear and were able to sleep inside their tents to stay dry, but there was something strange in the air. It was a sense of foreboding, like imminent disaster was just around the corner. After breakfast on the 5th, the day they were supposed to meet the other group, the horror began. As they made their final descent, a hiker named Sacha suddenly started to scream. He grabbed his face and shrieked as blood started pouring from his eyes and ears. Nothing had happened to him. He wasn't hit by anything. He just began screaming and his eyes bled. Lyudmila tried to take care of Sasha, but she started bleeding from her face too.
I maybe should have warned you earlier that things were going to get gruesome. There's still time for you to skip ahead a little bit before I go on because things are going to get worse. Are you still here? Okay, you asked for it.
As Lyudmila bled from her eyes, another student flew into a frenzy. She hit her head against a rock until she passed out. Before anyone could grasp the situation, Sacha, the other student, and Lyudmila lay lifeless on the ground. 2 students fled in terror while Valentina and her friend Dennis were left with their lifeless friends. They decided to leave the bodies and go get help, but just as they were leaving, Dennis collapsed, foamed at the mouth, and coughed up blood until dead. Valentina was alone. The other 2 students were nowhere to be seen. Valentina spent the next 4 days lost, running through the mountains, stained in the blood of her friends. 2 weeks after she was found by the kayakers, a helicopter search team discovered the rest of the hikers. The 2 students who had run away were found to have suffered the same fate as the rest. So what happened? What is going on in the Siberian mountains that keeps killing hikers in such weird ways? This was almost worse than the Dietl Pass incident because the people died from seemingly nothing. It was an invisible enemy. Some people have blamed the incident on nerve gas, but where did the nerve gas come from? It doesn't make any sense. It's possible the hikers drank contaminated water, but then again, what kind of water causes somebody to bleed from their eyeballs? Another hypothesis is that all the hikers except for Valentina ate poisonous mushrooms.
It's all just too weird. Nobody knows what killed the hikers or how Valentina got away unscathed. Unscathed except for the lifelong trauma from witnessing such a tragic catastrophe. Do you have any theories as to what happened to these hikers? Let me know in the comments.
The Great Wall of Mystery.
This is unbelievable. It's crazy that more people aren't talking about the wall stretching across the Jordanian desert for almost 100 miles. It looks like a wall that divides the world, but it's in the middle of nowhere. Scientists don't know who built it, when they built it, or why. Surprise, surprise.
This little-known archaeological wonder is called Catskills. Contrary to what you might be thinking, it is not a new discovery. It was first seen by a British diplomat named Sir Alec Kirkbride in 1948. He was flying above the desert when he noticed a wall running for no obvious purpose across the country.
Almost a century later, and there's still almost nothing known about the wall. It was only recently that scientists started taking taking it seriously.
A group of researchers with the Aerial Archaeology in Jordan Project, or AAJ for short, investigated the wall using aerial photography. Here's what they found out. The structure is enormous, approximately 93 miles, but it used to be even bigger. The team identified some sections where two walls run parallel and other sections where the wall branches off. The branches seem to indicate other sections of wall running off into the distance. Sadly, those branching sections have completely crumbled and are gone. The wall isn't very high, it's only about 3 feet off the ground and a little more than 1.6 feet wide. Being so short, the wall couldn't have been meant to keep out enemies because even a soldier in heavy armor could have climbed over it. It also couldn't have been used to fence in animals, since they would have just jumped over it. The wall doesn't appear to have served any significant purpose.
But wait, there's more! All along the Catskills are towers. Archaeologists have already identified the destroyed foundations of about 100 towers. They seem to have been built after the wall, perhaps as guard stations.
They may have also been used as places where travelers or hunters could sleep for the night.
Dating the wall has proven especially difficult. The only clues come in the form of shattered pottery shards discovered in the towers. Based on the pottery, researchers think the wall was built during the Nabatean period, which was between 312 BC and 106 AD. The Nabateans were the same people who built Petra. I'll tell you more about them in a minute, but before I go down that road, let me tell you a little bit about the Fog of Doom.
The Fog of Doom. Fog of Doom sounds extremely ominous, and for good reason. On December 3rd, 1930, a mysterious fog engulfed the Moose Valley. The mist came from nowhere, thick and choking like campfire smoke. When it finally lifted, 64 people were dead. To this day, no one's ever been able to explain what happened. It was a cold day in the valley when people woke up to the fog. It was so difficult to see that ships couldn't go anywhere. Trains were brought to a standstill. This sleepy region of northwestern Europe was crippled by the fog. What made things extra creepy was that nobody could remember a fog like this ever appearing before. It felt like the apocalypse had just moved in. Normally the fog would have lifted by the afternoon, but it didn't. The mists of doom just kind of hovered there, a persistent thickness in the air that couldn't be escaped. Even as people locked themselves in their homes and shut their windows, they were forced to inhale whatever was in the mist. It seeped into their houses like the wispy tendrils of a ghost. And that was when people started suffering from a mysterious respiratory illness. Within days, newspapers were calling whatever had arrived in Belgium's valley the Black Death. Because this was 1930 and people still remembered the terrible gas attacks of World War I, the Belgian government was worried about biological warfare. The government sent 20,000 gas masks to the villagers. The masks didn't save them. Within 3 days, thousands of people were reporting difficulty breathing. People were suffering from chest pains, wheezing, nausea, vomiting, you name it, they had it. Then they started falling dead in the streets as if the medieval plague had returned. Some of the victims were young too, and didn't seem to suffer from any previous conditions. One victim in their early 20s was walking home from a party when they suddenly collapsed and died. After the fog, the Belgian government called an inquiry. The Ministry of Health blamed the incident on local conditions. The mayor of Engis, one of the towns that was hit the hardest, blamed the deaths on sulfuric acid fumes. He claimed the fumes got mixed into the heavy fog because of static air and low temperatures. 56 out of the 64 casualties were in Engis, although the real cause is still not certain. Modern historians think the deaths were caused by industrial pollution from nearby factories. It's believed winter fog, temperature inversion, and coal combustion combined to create an actual fog of doom. This wasn't the only fatal fog incident either. In 1952, the Great Smog of London killed 12,000 people. The Nabateans and the Mystery Wall. Let's get back to that huge wall in Jordan. I want to tell you about the Nabateans. They were a powerful kingdom in ancient Jordan. They built the famous city of Petra and grew amazingly rich from their trading network, which specialized in selling frankincense and myrrh. Yes, frankincense used to be in high demand. When the three wise men brought their gifts to the baby Jesus, they brought the best. Much of the Nabatean culture remains a mystery though, because of what happened with the Romans. This is a little piece of history they don't usually teach you in school. Petra rose quickly in the 1st century BC, with the population of the capital soaring to 20,000. The Nabateans allied themselves with the Hasmoneans and fought against the Judeans. They even built the megalithic city of Avdat, its ruins still standing on a huge tabletop mesa in Israel. When the Romans tried to defeat the Nabateans, they had a rough time. They originally laid siege to Petra in 62 BC, but the Roman politician in charge accepted a bribe to lift the siege. The Nabateans didn't just make themselves rich from selling frankincense. Their trading network was making the whole world rich. Destroying their city was bad business. Alas, the Romans were conquerors to the end. They did eventually absorb the Nabateans into their empire. They didn't violently destroy them, but made them a client state. This happened in the 1st or 2nd century. For the next couple hundred years, the Nabateans survived, but grew highly Romanized. They stopped writing in their original language, and by the 5th century, they were fully fledged Christians. They'd gone from a mystery desert people with strange gods to being Roman Christians. Things just got worse and worse. During the Arab conquest, with the rise of Islam, the sad remnants of the Nabatean people saw themselves demoted to petty, squabbling peasants. The great city of Petra was swallowed by the desert sands. That was a bit of a diversion from the original story, but it's all important information if you and I are going to get to the bottom of this anomaly. The general consensus is that the wall must have been built during the height of the Nabatean kingdom, before they were seduced by Rome. As for its purpose, David Kennedy has an idea. David was involved in the recent investigation of the wall and happens to be a professor at the University of Western Australia. He thinks the wall was a boundary marker. It may have separated ancient Nabatean farmers and dangerous nomads. On one side of the wall were farms, and on the other side of the wall was the Arab version of the ancient Wild West. There is another theory, though, one that you might find interesting. What if the wall is way older than archaeologists think? They've only technically been able to date the towers, which they know were built after the wall. What if the wall is way older, like thousands of years older? It's possible the wall was already ancient when the Nabateans built their towers. Saint Helena's quest for the Holy Grail. How would you feel about going on a quest for the Holy Grail? It sounds like fun, right? But did you know that people have been searching for the Holy Grail since before the days of King Arthur? The earliest reference of this ancient Christian artifact is from 53 AD. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians mentions the cup Jesus drank from at the Last Supper. Ever since, people have been desperate to find it. In the Gospels, Jesus Christ had his disciples drink wine from his cup at the Last Supper. But what became of the cup after that? There are almost no mentions of Christian artifacts until after Emperor Constantine converted the Roman Empire to Christianity in the 4th century BC. That was when Christian relics started showing up, all thanks to Constantine's mother. The emperor's mom was Helena of Constantinople, later known as Saint Helena. She was one of the first people to go in search of sacred Christian artifacts. Hardly anybody knows about this woman today, yet she played a major role in Christian archaeology. She was like the Roman Indiana Jones, literally on a quest to find the Holy Grail. Her search for the relics of Jesus Christ took her on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, but when Helena arrived in Jerusalem, the city didn't look much like it had when Jesus was alive. Roman legions had burned Jerusalem to the ground in 70 AD to suppress a Judean rebellion. In 135, the Romans destroyed the city again to quell yet another rebellion. Helena was left by herself to identify holy Christian sites that had already been forgotten. She supposedly discovered the true cross, the very cross Jesus Christ was crucified on. She found a nail that had been used in the crucifixion. She also found the robe that Jesus wore while he hung from the cross. Helena was the one who identified the tomb where Jesus was buried. This tomb would later become the site of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Only after Helena's quest did Christian relics began appearing throughout the empire. The crown of thorns Jesus wore was discovered, and then so was the Holy Lance, the spear used to pierce his side. This mythical weapon is still on display today. Even Hitler once owned it. A less popular but still wildly rare relic is the Holy Sponge, the one that was used to moisten Jesus' lips as he suffered on the cross. All of these treasures were discovered in the years after Helena's pilgrimage, but there was one object that neither Helena nor those after her could find: the Holy Grail. How surprised would you be if I told you there is a church in Spain that claims to have the Holy Grail? Well, it's true. The Valencia Cathedral has a cup on display inside a beautifully made reliquary above the altar. The church claims it is the real Grail. Weirdly, it might actually be the Grail. The cup itself dates from the 1st century, from the time Jesus Christ lived. It's a solid red agate cup, fairly ordinary, except that it's also adorned with jewels and gems installed in the 12th century. It's been housed in the cathedral since 1399. However, nobody knows where it came from. If you're not getting Grail vibes from the cup in Spain, what about the Holy Bowl in Genoa, Italy? This mysterious artifact is held in the treasury of the Cathedral of San Lorenzo. It's not exactly a cup, as it's shaped more like a green bowl. The church claims this was the real vessel Christ drank out of during the Last Supper. It was found near Lake Galilee during the First Crusade and brought to Genoa. Do you think any of these could really be the Holy Grail? Let me know in the comments. The Redpath Mansion Murders. More than 120 years later, and history buffs are still puzzled over the brutal Redpath Mansion murders. This is one true crime mystery you're not going to find on Netflix. Rumors are still circulating over what happened in this historic Canadian manor. The year was 1901. On June 13th, Ada Maria Redpath and her son, Jocelyn Clifford, were discovered shot to death in their family mansion near the location of today's Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. The Redpath family was at the top of Montreal's ruling class. Ada and her kin had control over the city, sort of like how the Medici family used to control Florence. They became rich by building Montreal's Lachine Canal and creating a sugar company. Ada and Clifford were found in Ada's bedroom in a pool of blood. Within 48 hours, they had been buried and the investigation was closed. Members of the Redpath family did not discuss the tragedy. They also appear to have stopped the police from looking too deeply into it. So what happened? Surely someone's figured it out by now. Donovan King runs a local ghost tour company called Haunted Montreal. He said there's a lot of speculation over what happened. Some believe Clifford was responsible for both deaths. He was 26 years old and there were rumors he wanted his family's money, or maybe he was trying to hide the fact he was gay. Others have guessed Ada suffered from insomnia and somehow killed her son during a manic episode of insanity. Sadly, the historic property was abandoned and fell into disrepair. The mansion was supposedly haunted by their spirits until the demolition. Here's an image of it before demolition crews tore it down brick by brick in 2014. Over the years, people have been trying to solve the cold case. There is a team that has found diaries and photos, a coroner's report, and condolence letters sent to the Redpath family. You can actually check them out for yourselves. To this day, the Redpath Mansion murders remain one of the city's most captivating unsolved mysteries. The unsolved earthworks of the United States. There is a mystery in the United States that few people even know about. It's a mystery that dates back 2,000 years. Evidence of it is everywhere, all the way from the Gulf of Mexico to the Canadian border. I'm talking about America's forgotten mound culture, a civilization known today as the Hopewell built cities, earthworks, and megaliths across the United States for centuries and then disappeared. They didn't leave any written records of themselves behind. Have you heard of the octagon? Not the UFC octagon. I mean the octagon, a curious circle formed by a series of earthen walls built about 2,000 years ago. It's in Newark, Ohio at the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks. The site is huge, covering a massive network of ancient artificial hills. The octagon was likely the most important of the earthworks here. Archaeologists think people came from hundreds of miles away to gather at the octagon, performing rituals and worshipping. Well, nobody really knows what they were worshipping. The Hopewell culture has been lost for centuries. Today, you wouldn't even know you were standing at the center of an ancient ritualistic space unless somebody told you. Take a look at this image thanks to Ohio History Connection. This is the octagon, a grassy hill that is currently being used as a golf course. It's on private property, part of the Mound Builders Country Club. You can't even see this ancient wonder because it's inaccessible to the public. You need to be a member of the club to golf on the Native American ruins. Here's another image image from Ohio History Connection, showing what the octagon looked like in antiquity. Researchers think the octagon was at the center of a vast landscape of earthen mounds, ceremonial centers, and primitive neighborhoods of thatch houses. I do have some exciting news. In 2023, the Ohio Supreme Court ruled that the Mound Builders Country Club must turn over its lease of the property to Ohio History Connection. The country club and golf course will be replaced by a public park. It's only a matter of the courts determining how much money it will take to buy out the club's lease. While that's great for history lovers, it still doesn't solve the mystery of who the Hopewell were, or what happened to them. Thanks for watching. What's the craziest unsolved mystery you've ever heard of? Let us know in the comments below, and hopefully I can do a deep dive on it in an upcoming video. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe before you go.
Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
Dark secrets at a medieval nunnery. At a medieval Benedictine nunnery in Oxford, the United Kingdom, archaeologists have discovered the darkest side of convent life. During their excavations here, they uncovered just about 100 skeletons that belonged to men, women, and children. But they also uncovered some very strange burials, including one woman buried with her face down in the dirt and a small baby between her legs. The nunnery is known as the Littlemore Priory, originally founded in 1110 and then dissolved by the year 1525. According to Paul Murray with the John Moore Heritage Services, the reason this woman was buried face down probably had something to do with her perceived sins in life. In other words, the nuns buried her in such a way because being entombed in the ground with her face pressed into the dirt was considered an act of atonement, often reserved for women accused of being witches. As for the baby's burial, that remains a mystery. Nobody knows exactly what crimes this mysterious woman did or did not commit in her life. What we do know is that the nunnery had quite a controversial history. It was described in a medieval English text as in grave disorder, and even one of the worst nunneries ever. This was apparently all because of the nuns, who frequently misbehaved. One of them was busted having an illegitimate daughter with one of the priests. The nunnery was embroiled in so much scandal that it had to be closed down in the early 1500s, after which it was abandoned. Creepy stone mask. A terrifying stone mask was uncovered in an ancient pyramid by archaeologists working in Mexico. Not only is the mask green and pretty creepy, it also looks remarkably similar to the magical artifact featured in the 1994 Jim Carrey film, The Mask, a fact that internet users pounced on when pics of the discovery surfaced on Twitter. According to researchers working with the National Institute of Anthropology and History in Mexico, the mask was actually part of a ritual in which the Great Pyramid of the Sun was inaugurated in the city of Teotihuacan. This was back around the year 100 AD. The green mask was one of the artifact offerings thrown into a pit full of treasure to celebrate the pyramid's completion. The Pyramid of the Sun is the largest building in Teotihuacan, the legendary temple complex just north of Mexico City. Researchers had to dig a tunnel 380 feet long just to get to the ground level of the pyramid, to where the creepy mask and other strange artifacts were found. Archaeologists also uncovered weird figurines of serpent-human hybrids, clay pottery fragments, and other miscellaneous objects. But here's the deal. The discovery was made back in the 1930s. It was just recently that pictures of the mask began circulating online, giving Teotihuacan some renewed interest. This was the largest city in the Western Hemisphere prior to the 1400s. And from between the 1st to the 5th century AD, this was one of the most populated cities in the world, with about 125,000 citizens. Ancient Egyptian spell. Archaeologists in Egypt recently discovered an ancient book inside of a sarcophagus. Both artifacts have been dated back 4,000 years, with the book being the oldest of its kind. So far, it seems to be some sort of book of spells. This creepy discovery has brought to light some interesting new information about the ancient Egyptians and how they practiced magic. This discovery was just one in a wider group of recent finds announced by the Egyptian government. In total, they found about 59 coffins in Saqqara, just south of Cairo. These coffins contained mummies, most of them wrapped in cloth with bright hieroglyphic script scribbled on their carapaces. But in one of the sarcophagi, the experts found a funerary text known only as the Book of Two Ways, a precursor to the Book of the Dead. This book contains specific instructions on how to help a departed soul navigate spiritual obstacles so that they can reach the land of the dead. Keep in mind that this book doesn't have a cover, there are no pages, and it's actually just a series of texts written on the inside of the dead person's sarcophagus. The individual died sometime around 2010 BC, during the reign of Pharaoh Mentuhotep II. The spells weren't magical incantations exactly, more like a series of rituals that needed to be performed for the deceased to reach the afterlife in one piece. Oddly enough, many of the rituals had to be performed by the dead person once they crossed over. What's really interesting is that many of these books have been found, and they are always different depending on the wealth and status of the deceased. Poor people couldn't afford to have spells scribbled inside their sarcophagi, while wealthier people could afford to have their coffins covered in as many spells as possible. Peruvian Pet Graves. Archaeological investigators in Peru have discovered evidence of an ancient culture who loved their pet dogs so much that they built pet cemeteries for them. According to anthropologist Sonia Guillen, these ancient people never sacrificed their dogs, but instead buried them in lavish style as a way to recognize contributions the dogs had made to their society and their family. Since 1993, at least 82 dog tombs have been found in various pet cemeteries throughout the Osmore River Valley, about 540 miles south of the capital of Lima. But just who were these dog-loving people? They were known as the Baya, an ancient culture of farmers who thrived from between 900 AD to 1350 AD, before the Inca Empire came into power. They were a quiet society, keeping to themselves mostly as they toiled on their farms and tried to survive. The dogs they used to help in their everyday lives may be the ancestors of modern Peruvian dogs. Nobody's been able to prove it yet, but genetics researchers are currently working to connect the dots between the ancient Chiribaya dog breed to animals like the modern Peruvian hairless dog. If you could, would you bury your dog in its very own tomb? Or would you want to be buried with your dog? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Lost Tunnel. Electrical technicians in South Wales made a surprising and creepy discovery in someone's backyard while working for Western Power Distribution and moving an electrical pole. As the techs worked to relocate the pole, which was in someone's garden, they were startled as it was revealed they had broken through into a tunnel system that had been hidden since the 12th century. What makes the tunnel so interesting is that nobody knew it existed, not the local residents or the local authorities. And it was creepy, completely dark, like some kind of forgotten tomb. Work had to be stopped, and archaeologists were called in to investigate, bringing with them maps of the small village that date all the way back to the 18th century. But the tunnel system was not on any of their maps, and to make matters even more complicated, the tunnels eventually get so narrow that the only way through is to crawl. Nobody knows where they end up or who built them, and it could take years of investigating before the mystery of the tunnels is solved. Imagine all of the creepy reasons a tunnel system like that could have been dug. The death whistle. The Aztec death whistle is by far one of the creepiest musical instruments, if it can even be called that, from the ancient world. The sound made by the Aztec death whistle is arguably one of the most frightening sounds that you'll ever hear in your life. It sounds like a zombie opened up its mouth and started screaming. And that's just one whistle. The Aztec army, when marching towards the enemy, may have blown hundreds or even thousands of these things. The resulting noise would have been enough to leave the opposing army nervous, scared, and feeling like they were about to be slaughtered by a literal army of demons. However, nobody actually knows what the Aztec society used these whistles for. Experts say it makes sense that they were an intimidation technique for war, but there's been no proof of this. The only proof is that the whistles were definitely used in human sacrifice. This is because in 1999, a sacrificial victim was uncovered by archaeologists. In his skeletal hand, he clutched an Aztec death whistle. The experts found him inside the temple of Ehecatl, the Aztec wind god. This has led some scholars to wonder if the whistles weren't meant to evoke the fury of the howling wind. Yikes. A prehistoric burial. Scientists have uncovered a mysterious child burial from 78,000 years ago in a Kenyan cave. The child was no older than 3 years old at the time of their death, though experts can't figure out yet if the child was a male or a female. What makes the discovery so unique is that the child was buried in a ritualistic style, with their body carefully wrapped in cloth, then placed in the grave on their side with their knees tucked up against their chest. They were then covered with dirt and left just a few inches beneath the floor of the cave. According to Nicole Boivin, an archaeologist with the Max Planck Institute in Germany, the burial was probably a group act. It may have been performed by members of the child's family. This is fascinating because it's one of the earliest examples of a family getting together to bury their dead, while showing the same level of respect for the deceased that we show our dead loved ones today. And this was 78,000 years ago, at a time when humans were still living in caves. Finding the bones of a dead child deep inside a cave is definitely creepy, but the more complex truth behind the burial is heartwarming. It shows a deep appreciation for human life back before any major civilization had even been born. Archaeologists are still struggling to find out when funeral behavior began, though it seems Homo sapiens and our relatives, the Neanderthals, both practiced it. A very old toilet. Archaeologists have discovered something pretty creepy in an entirely different way: a toilet from 2,700 years ago. The ancient potty was found inside the ruins of a palace in Israel, what had once been a luxury abode up in the mountains, with a clear view of Jerusalem's Temple Mount. Archaeologists don't know who owned the palace, but it was definitely somebody of extreme wealth. It may have been a member of elite society, perhaps even a king. Whatever the case, the presence of a private toilet in this ancient palace has proven a theory that only the richest members of society could afford their own toilet thousands of years ago. For the rest of society, they were stuck with public toilets or simply doing their business in the ditches beside the road. From what Yaakov Billig has said, the director of the excavation that discovered the toilet, only a handful have been discovered from the First Temple period of Israel. And in most cases, they weren't even really toilets. They were just toilet seats. But this time, the archaeologists found a full cabin made of stone with a toilet seat and a hole carved in the middle. It was designed to be extremely comfortable, and there was even a tank beneath the toilet for collecting waste. The toilet would have also been used as a garbage, since people weren't that fussy about what they did with their trash thousands of years ago. A giant penguin. In New Zealand, a 10-year-old boy discovered the fossil of a giant penguin while on a field trip. Sure, penguins might seem cute and cuddly today, but millions of years ago, these things were frightening. The child was on a fossil hunting field trip in Kauai Harbor when he spotted what he at first thought was a rusty propeller. But upon closer inspection, he and his teacher realized they were staring at a fossil encased in sandstone. The specimen was taken back for analysis, with scientists later finding out its identity. The skeleton is that of a giant species of penguin that lived 30 million years ago. The creature stood nearly 5 feet tall, almost larger than the kid who found its fossil. And amazingly, it was discovered to be an entirely new species, a type of penguin that lived in New Zealand at a time when the whole region was underwater. But what makes this flightless bird so strange? It looked just like any other penguin, except it had weirdly long legs that made it ridiculously tall. It was even taller than the largest living penguins we have on Earth right now, the emperor penguin. The tallest emperor penguin is only about 4 feet, and this ancient species was nearly a foot taller. What do you think about giant penguins? Let me know in the comments below. Cat fur clothes. In a truly bizarre discovery, archaeologists have found evidence that human beings were making clothes out of cat skin about 120,000 years ago. Most of us know that our ancestors made their clothes from animals, but we usually think of them utilizing deer skins and making leather from wild cattle. The truth is a little stranger. Humans from the Pleistocene era living in what is modern-day Morocco were catching cats, skinning them, and then using their cat fur to make all manner of clothing. To make things even more bizarre, archaeologists found evidence that they had also been butchering bovids at the time, but instead only using them to produce meat. In other words, they were hunting wild cattle and eating them, while hunting wild cats and making shirts and pants out of them. And to make matters worse for our feline friends, this practice likely went on up until just recently, maybe 15 or 10,000 years ago. This means that our ancient ancestors wore cat skins as clothing for a period of over 100,000 years. What do you think about cat fur? Let me know in the comments below. The lizard men. Most of us are familiar with the theories about a secret reptilian race living underneath our very feet, pulling the global strings from their secret lairs. And while it may seem like nonsense, some strange figurines discovered at the archaeological site of Al-Ubaid suggest otherwise. 7,000 years ago, the Sumerians carved a series of bizarre statues in the form of lizard people. This is no exaggeration. They look like any other statues carved by an ancient civilization, except that from the chest up, they are clearly reptilian. One of the statues even shows a female lizard human with a little hybrid baby held in the crook of her arm. Is this proof that we are all ruled by alien overlords from a planet of reptilians? Of course not, but it is confusing, especially since scientists have never been able to solve the mystery of the Ubaid lizard men. Excavations first started at the site in 1919. Archaeologist Harry Reginald Hall was the one to first come across the figures, which left him in utter disbelief. They were created by the Ubaid culture of southern Mesopotamia in the earliest days of human civilization. This was when the first villages started cropping up and when people began irrigating the farmland. It may not be a coincidence that people started building houses at the same time they were allegedly visited by highly advanced reptilians. What do you think? Let me know your theories in the comments below. The Babylonian Map of the World. The Babylonian Map of the World is one of the oldest ever drawn. It was created in ancient Mesopotamia around the year 700 BC in what is now southern Iraq. It's not a map like you might think of one, not drawn on a piece of paper. Instead, the map of the world as the Babylonians knew it was inscribed on a clay tablet. It's amazing because it shows just how small the Babylonians really thought the world was. The top half of the map is a circle showing places like Assyria and Elam. There are also some mysterious places that appear to be cities, some of which archaeologists haven't been able to identify. The center of the map, the area of Mesopotamia, is ringed by what they called Salt Sea. But the big mystery is that the Babylonians marked regions unknown to science. The map shows lands and islands and the distance between them and Babylon. Along with each region is written a small description on the map in cuneiform. The text describes strange and outlandish beasts that can't possibly be real. They also describe the heroes who lived in these faraway places, though they are completely unheard of to historians. There is a major debate surrounding this map. Some historians believe it was one of the first serious examples of ancient geography. Other historians believe the actual purpose of the map was to show the Babylonian mythological world. In other words, it may have been a map representing different places and people in Babylonian myth, not the real map. We just don't know. Lost Egyptian Labyrinth. The lost Egyptian labyrinth of Hawara is a mystery that goes back 2,000 years. Archaeologists originally uncovered what they thought to be the remains of a mysterious labyrinth decades ago at the foot of the Pyramid of Hawara. Before the discovery, this labyrinth was thought to be a structure only spoken of in myth. The pyramid was built by the last great ruler of the 12th dynasty, Amenemhat III. It's also believed to be the pharaoh's final resting place, though his mummy has never been discovered. There was another pyramid built for the daughter of the pharaoh, Neferu-Ta, located about a mile away. But adjacent to the main pyramid is the mystery I'm here to tell you about. The giant mortuary temple, which we know definitely existed, may have also formed a complex system of buildings, galleries, and passages. This honeycomb structure could very well have been more spectacular than the Great Labyrinth of Crete in Greek myth, except real. The issue is that archaeologists don't know if there really was a labyrinth. They have found ruins, but it's unclear how extensive they are. The labyrinth would have been entirely underground, built from nothing but mud and brick. And because of this, much of it has probably already collapsed and is beyond recovery. The only other proof we have comes from the Greek historian Herodotus. He visited the city 2,000 years ago and described an underground complex of caverns and chambers beyond anything he could imagine. What do you think? Did the Egyptians have a labyrinth? Let me know in the comments below. The Astronaut of Cadiz. The Astronaut of Cadiz is one of the strangest artifacts that we know almost nothing about. It's a stone slab that allegedly dates back to the days of Rome, but perhaps even earlier. It was found embedded in the wall of a cemetery in the small Spanish village called Cazar. The slab is an unsolved mystery because archaeologists can't agree on where the stone came from or who made it. But I assure you it is real. It is currently on display at a museum in Spain. The giant stone slab shows what appears to be either an alien or a warrior. It's definitely a strange figure, with the body of a person but a head that looks more like a mushroom. There is an inscription carved into the body of the figure, composed of a mishmash of different languages. The writing is in Latin characters, but the language is a bizarre mix of Lusitanian, Tartessian, and Basque. These are all ancient Indo-European languages. Some say the figure is meant to represent a Celt-Iberian warrior from the 1st century BC. Others say it's supposed to be an astronaut. They say the mushroom-shaped head is actually a space helmet, and that the curious figure is a visitor from another planet. What do you think? Is the mushroom-shaped head meant to represent an astronaut, or simply some kind of warrior's helmet? Maybe something else. Let me know in the comments. The soldier that teleported. In October of 1593, a soldier by the name of Gil Perez teleported 8,000 miles. At least that's how the story goes. Gil was a soldier in the Spanish Empire. He was guarding the palace of the governor in Manila in the Philippines. At this point in history, the Philippines had already been under the control of the Spanish since 1565. But the 7th governor of the territory, Dasmariñas, was executed by Chinese rowers who mutinied against him on his boat. This event threw Manila into a bit of chaos. But even with the governor dead, the palace still had to be guarded. Gil began to get dizzy and sleepy during his shift. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, he was 8,800 miles away. He had teleported to Mexico City. He was questioned by some guards in strange uniforms he didn't recognize. They thought he was a deserter from the Spanish army and threw him in a prison cell. But here's the thing that's really interesting. Gil told his captors about the assassination in Manila. Because of the huge distance between Mexico City and the Philippines, news of the governor's death hadn't arrived yet. Everyone thought this guy was crazy. But then, months later, a ship arrived in Mexico with news of the governor's death. This man knew months before anyone in North America could have possibly been aware. This story could just be a story, but there are historical records of the event. A Spanish clergyman and historian named Gaspar de San Agustin wrote of the account in 1698. He believed the soldier had used witchcraft to transport himself. The Newton Stone. The Newton Stone was found in Aberdeenshire, Scotland in 1804. A local earl named George Hamilton Gordon found a stone when a new road opened up near a farm. Local shepherds told him of a monument rising out from the grass. The stone was removed from its original site and planted in a garden in Newton House. This was 220 years ago, give or take a few years. It should come as no surprise that archaeological wonders were uprooted and put in the gardens of rich people's estates. Because of this, nobody knows if the indecipherable inscription on the stone was added after it was moved or before it was found. The stone today has 2 inscriptions on it. The first is written in ancient Ogham script. Ogham is an alphabet from the medieval days that was used to write in the Irish language. There are only about 400 surviving inscriptions of Ogham in the entire world. This particular one seems to be nothing but a list of names of unknown people. The second inscription is written in a language that nobody has ever been able to identify. People have tried deciphering it for over a century, but nobody can figure it out. Some have suggested Phoenician, but we don't know for sure. It's become so frustrating that many experts believe the second inscription was a prank carved into the stone long after it was already found. What do you think is written on this mysterious Scottish stone? Let me know any theories you have in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe before you leave. We've got lots more videos coming up. The Mummy of the Myhri. The tomb of the mummy Myhri was found by Victor Loret in the year 1899. It was found next to the tomb of Pharaoh Amenhotep II. The unsolved mystery is that nobody knows who he is or why he was given a tomb next to somebody as important as a pharaoh. Research shows that the individual died in his early 20s, but no cause of death has ever been found. He was also identified as Nubian from the south of Egypt. Based on his proximity to the pharaoh and the great variety of treasure in his tomb, he was definitely important during the 18th dynasty. His mummy was in great condition, except for a little bit of skin missing from his feet. He was still adorned in heaps of jewelry, his cartonnage mask still resting on his face. His name is a little curious too. Myhri translates roughly to the lion of the battlefield. He also had 2 titles, Child of the Nursery and Fan Bearer on the right side of the king. These long, complicated names only makes things more mysterious. Archaeologists think he may have grown up in the royal nursery, perhaps as a son to one of the pharaoh's less important wives or one of his concubines. Humans in the Catskills. Strange formations in the Catskills may be proof of an ancient civilization. The huge rock formations can be found along the edges of a hiking trail on Overlook Mountain in Woodstock. There are several of them along the sides of the mountain, but it remains unclear where they came from. Mainstream archaeologists haven't even bothered to excavate or investigate them. The rock formations still stand just as they have for hundreds of years. Glenn Kreisberg, an amateur archaeologist, believes he knows where the formations came from. He believes them to be the remains of a tribal civilization that lived in the Catskills before Europeans ever took the land for themselves. He has identified 19 of these sites in the Catskills, each one a huge pile of stones that looks like an ancient burial cairn. But he's found more than just formations. He's also discovered stone effigies of snakes, rock chambers, and huge walls that are mostly broken apart. Glenn says that whoever lived here was just as advanced as the Mayans or ancient Britons. And while that's doubtful, it is clear that some culture did live in these mountains. We just don't know who or how advanced their civilization really was. The tunnels of Baya. The old city of Baya can be found today in the Italian region of Campania. It was once a seaside resort visited by the wealthiest inhabitants of Rome. Imagine the most exclusive beach resort in the world. That was Baya 2,000 years ago. It was notorious for parties, lewd activities, and hedonistic patrons. But as the centuries went by, volcanic activity caused the ancient resort town to be sunk under the water. Today, the entire location is submerged. But there is one mystery about Baya that remains unsolved. In 1932, Italian archaeologist Amedeo Myhri discovered the entrance to a hidden tunnel. This tunnel led into a cave that may have been constructed to mimic the Greek underworld. While walking through the darkness of the tunnels, one needed to cross an underground stream of sulfur water that could have easily represented the river Styx. This was the legendary river that every newly deceased person had to travel to reach Hades, the name of both the underworld and its patron god. On the other side of the stream, archaeologists found a landing stage. This probably would have been where visitors docked their boats. Beyond this was a stairway to a hidden sanctuary. Completing the journey from the tunnel's entrance into the sanctuary would have felt like walking into the underworld. But what's crazy is that there are no historical records of this place existing. There is a story about a prophetess living in a nearby cave. But other than that, there are no clues as to what this cave was used for. It may have been a way to trick people into believing they had crossed over into the underworld. It may have been used for dark ceremonial rituals. We just have no idea. It's a total mystery. Swiss watch in a Chinese tomb. A Swiss watch about a century old was discovered in a tomb that was sealed 400 years ago. Nobody is quite sure how it happened, and it's become a huge mystery in the archaeological community. The grave dates back to the Ming Dynasty in southern China. When archaeologists opened the tomb, they found a miniature watch inside with a marking that says Swiss. The hands of the clock had stopped at approximately 10:06 a.m., crusted solid with mud and dirt. Clearly the watch had been in there for some time, but it makes no sense for a few reasons. First of all, people in the Ming Dynasty 400 years ago didn't wear watches. Second of all, there was no country of Switzerland back then. The rest of the tomb seemed perfectly normal. This was the only artifact out of place. The discovery was made back in 2008, and researchers still haven't been able to put together how the watch ended up in the tomb. How do you think it happened? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you soon for more awesome videos. Bye!